If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead no more than 7 minutes. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. This time-stamped email proves that this prediction that Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025 has been known since November 9th. We can see here the timestamp November 9th, 2024. On November 8th, 2024, we received the relevant prophetic signs related to Paul Simon. And as I wrote right here, God was pointing to November 8th ahead of time because Simon's death will point to Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. And this is the reason why Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. In short, the date 8:1 and 11:8 hint at Revelation 8:1 in the Bible, which describes a period of silence that was observed in heaven. Paul Simon's first hit was Sound of Silence. As I wrote right here, it is exactly 38 weeks between November 8th and August 1st, 2025, and Paul Simon is predicted to die at the age of 83, for which 38 weeks hints at. A dirty bomb is a conventional explosive that uses radioactive material. I am predicting that 3 dirty bombs will explode in New York City, in Times Square, Penn Station, and Grand Central Station. There will then be a massive evacuation from Manhattan Island. I am predicting that these 3 dirty bombs will explode on either August 30th or September 4th. I am also predicting that a dirty bomb will explode in the port of Los Angeles on September 4th. I am predicting that Tehran, Iran, will be nuked by the US or possibly Israel on September 7th, 2025. This will obviously be in response to the dirty bombs that are predicted to explode in New York City. I am predicting that Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom will die in a plane crash in St. Louis as they are traveling from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles in Busch Stadium in St. Louis on August 2nd, 2028. This will be during the predicted presidential campaign of Gavin Newsom. As a result of Gavin Newsom's death, Michelle Obama will become the Democrat Party's presidential nomination. Michelle Obama will, quote unquote, win the election over J.D. Vance on November 7th, 2028, and will become the president on January 20th, 2029. Donald Trump is predicted to run as J.D. Vance's vice president. This scheme to overcome the 22nd Amendment will backfire and inspire Michelle Obama and Barack Obama to run on the ticket with Barack Obama as Michelle Obama's vice president. She will then step down and Barack Obama will become the president again. It is predicted that there will be a massive Mary apparition on the beach in Rio, Brazil on April 24th, 2029. It is now recognized that there will be 2 massive Mary apparitions on the beach in Rio. The first of the 2 is predicted to be on March 22nd, 2029. These predicted Mary apparitions will not be secretive. They will be mainstream, worldwide news. Like all Mary apparitions in history, including at Lourdes, Guadalupe, and Fatima, this Mary apparition will be a demon pretending to be Mary. It is predicted that on April 26th, 2029, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the 5th trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens. The demons pretending to be aliens will claim to be here to help us with our nuclear weapons. It is predicted that Pope Francis will be resurrected from the grave on April 26, 2029. And it is possible that on this day, Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. April 26, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist and 5G frequencies. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. The resurrection rapture event will occur on Pentecost on May 27th, 2029. On September 11th, 2029, there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit of Earth in the Indian Ocean. The greatest seismic effect of this will be felt on the other side of the globe, which is North America, and this will trigger an eruption of Yellowstone volcano and will cause the volcano in the Canary Islands to collapse into the Atlantic Ocean and send a mega tsunami towards the East Coast. It will also trigger the collapse of the Hoover Dam, which will cause a water panic in California, and many other devastating earthquakes. The day of the Lord, the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, Judgment Day, will be at the end of 2031. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, welcome to this extremely profound and important video. I will be talking about the prophetic signs that occurred on July 4th, America's birthday, specifically the flooding in Texas. You'll know it as the Kerr County flooding, or the Guadalupe River flooding, or the flooding of the Mystic Camp of the young girls. All right, and as I will explain, it is a prophetic sign that communicates a warning of judgment, of destruction for America, but also specifically points to Paul Simon, who lives nearby in Wimberley, Texas. I'll explain so much more regarding this connection here between Paul Simon and the Kerr County flooding. But as you will see, make no mistake, the Kerr County flooding is, like I'm saying, in general, a sign for a warning of judgment on America, as will be the death of Paul Simon, which is predicted to be on August 1st. But as you'll see, the Kerr County flooding is pointing to Paul Simon's predicted death on August 1st. As we can see here, the date that this email was composed on July 8th proves that this prediction for Paul Simon's death on August 1st is being made ahead of time, as does the post date of this video on the social media platform that you are watching. And, well, here we go. Also here you can see July 8th was when this email was written, with this prediction for the death of Paul Simon on August 1st. So the first thing to say is that July 4th, the date 7-4, hints at Genesis 7:4. Genesis 7:4. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made will blot out from the face of the ground. In other words, Genesis 7:4 is the passage in which God first tells Noah about the coming judgment, destruction by the flood. So, if you will, the passage Genesis 7:4 symbolizes the flood. It isn't a coincidence that America's birthday is 7/4. It all comes together in the end, the climax of the age. And I mean the last 2,000 years and beyond. Really, since the beginning of man. It all climaxes at the end of this age, which will usher in the new age of Christ. God dwelling on earth as man and full revelation of God to the world. That's the coming messianic age. Not like the New Agers' New Age, which is a counterfeit from Satan. The New Age religion is from Satan. Not like that New Age, but the New Age that's coming. I'm talking about the end of the age will climax with the destruction of God's Gentile nation, America, that was born on the date July 4th, which is why Genesis 7:4. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God in the Bible, Israel and America. Sometimes people ask me, why are you so focused on America in terms of prophetic signs? And the answer to that is because God is. God is focused on America. God isn't demonstrating prophetic signs to other nations like America. There are the occasional prophetic signs that are in other countries, but they ultimately also point to America. And so that's how it works. That's how, for example, why God chose a particular people in a particular place geographically at the crossroads of the ancient world to begin his revelation to the world of who he is. He chose a specific time, location, and people. Well, that's the same concept with God having chosen America as his Gentile nation and his focus for his end times prophetic signs. They aren't scattered everywhere, just like he didn't scatter his revelation to the world everywhere. He chose a particular people for his purposes. He has chosen America for his purposes. And so this prophetic flooding on July 4th, 2025 couldn't be more important. It is America's birthday, but the timing of this is 2025, if you will, symbolic beginning of the final period. It isn't literally 7 years from July 4th, but it is symbolic of this final 7 years that's alluded to in Bible prophecy. The second coming of Lord Jesus Christ will be on the Day of Atonement in 2031. And the prediction in this video being made that is from God will prove this, and this is the purpose of the prediction. Make no mistake, I know far better than you the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. Don't concoct your own theory as to how or why the purpose of this prediction. I know more than you the reason and purpose for this prediction. And it is to prove the controversial things that I am saying, including, for example, the heresy of the doctrine of imminence, which is in fact from Satan, and flatly contradicts many passages in the Bible that the adherents to the doctrine of imminence ignore willfully. I'll have more to say regarding that in other videos. But returning to the subject here, that's the purpose of this flooding in Texas, incidentally the 7x4th state, on the date 7/4, because it points to Genesis 7:4 and judgment destruction coming for America. Now, let me get into the rest of this video, but like I said at the beginning, the death of Paul Simon will likewise be a massive warning of judgment and destruction for America. All right, so let's get into what I wrote here to some friends. On the nation's birthday, July 4th, we received a major prophetic sign warning of the coming judgment and destruction of America. This was the flooding event in Texas. July 4th equals 7-4, and Texas is the 7 times 4th state to join the Union. In other words, the flooding in Texas on July 4th was symbolic of judgment and destruction of America. Two of the well-known hits of singer-songwriter Paul Simon are America and American Tune. Paul Simon is predicted to die on August 1st. The predicted death of the singer of Sound of Silence on 8/1, August 1st, will point to Revelation 8:1 and the sound of silence, and the sound of silence that was heard in heaven for a half an hour. So Revelation 8:1 describes a period of silence that is observed in heaven. And Simon's big hit that launched his career, his first hit, was Sound of Silence. As will be explained, the flooding northwest of San Antonio, Texas, near Wimberley, Texas, where Simon and his wife Edie Brickell reside, was a prophetic sign that confirmed the date for Simon's predicted death on August 1st. Okay, and to emphasize here, one reason God is using Paul Simon is because of his songs America and American Tune, his hits, which makes Paul Simon symbolic of America. And when we think about it too, Paul Simon is really the quintessential pop folk singer of America. I mean, he does in a way represent America. He is furthermore representative of his baby boomer generation musicians, the 60s, 70s. He really is arguably the most symbolic singer of that generation, which is the generation that God is focused on also. That's another subject. But like I was just talking about, God is focused on a particular people, like the Jews, but also America. But specifically, long story, God is focused on the baby boomer generation, which is incidentally why the second coming will absolutely not occur after the baby boomer generation passes from the scene of life. They will be here for the judgment destruction. They are largely responsible for the sin having exceeded the tolerable limit and the destruction and judgment. They are not going to miss that. And they are at the edge of going into the afterlife. So now is the time. That's one way to know that now is the time for the judgment destruction. The fact that the baby boomers are at the end of their lifespan. Okay, so Paul Simon symbolizes that. But anyway, that's why the song America and American Tune, which incidentally Paul Simon sang at the inaugural ball for Jimmy Carter. Now, in the story of the Kerr County flooding in Texas was a man who volunteers for Texar, okay, which is a rescue organization. So one of the stories, in other words, one of the human interest stories of this flooding was this volunteer, this one man who volunteers for Texar, which is a rescue organization. This man, along with his wife and 2 kids, were swept away in a major flood of the Blanco River in Wimberley, Texas in 2015. He was the lone survivor in his family. This flooding in Wimberley on May 26, 2015, saw the riverbanks rise to a record 41 feet. 41 is equal to the 13th prime number. And the flooding that rose to 41 feet was well above the 13-foot flood stage for the river. 13 people died when the river rose to 41 feet, the 13th prime number of feet, when it rose above the 13-foot flood stage. You're getting the idea here. There's a bunch of 13s. Paul Simon, who lives in Wimberley, which is where this flooding we were talking about was born on the date 1013 in 41. Right? The river rose to 41 feet. Paul Simon was born in 41, which is consequential, as I'll explain here. Simon wrote and sang the hit songs America and American Tune. America was founded on 13 colonies and is symbolically the 13th tribe of Israel. That's another story, but Ephraim and Manasseh divided the 12th tribe into 13 tribes, and these two tribes symbolize the UK and America. After the Jews rejected God, God went to the Gentiles to spread the gospel of Christ around the world, and he used the English-speaking countries, the British Empire, in this cross-pollination of cultures of the world that was the British Empire, and also used the UK and the Protestants in the UK to spread, and the other English-speaking countries, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand, to spread, and America primarily, to spread the gospel around the world. Okay, and so that's why these two are symbolic of this. And Manasseh was the younger of the two, but received the blessing, the inheritance, which God goes out of his way to demonstrate in the book of Genesis, because it ultimately demonstrates that Manasseh, the 13th tribe, symbolizes America, which is why the 13 colonies. And colonies were geographical areas. When the Hebrews went into the promised land, they divided the land into 13 areas for 12, but 13 because of Ephraim and Manasseh. 11, but because of Ephraim and Manasseh. The tribe of Joseph was divided into two. Okay, so Wimberley, Texas, is north of San Antonio, where the Alamo mission was besieged for 13 days during the Battle of the Alamo. The Americans lost the Battle of the Alamo after 13 days when the Mexican army overcame the Alamo's walls of security. When the Israelites entered the Promised Land, they enacted a symbolic ritual that God told them to do, and then the walls of security of Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. This is this theme that God is using in his signs, and that's also, by the way, the reason for the southern border wall of security collapsing. After Trump left office, the Israelites blew trumpets before the walls of security collapsed. Okay, so, and Trump's campaign and first presidency were also, of course, known for his border wall of security. Then he left office and the wall of security collapsed. Trump was a trumpeting this. Also, incidentally, the Israelites marched around the walls of security once per day for 7 days, and then on the seventh day, they blew 7 trumpets. It's 3 sets of 7. And on Inauguration Day, Trump was 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. Anyway, so back to what I was saying, though, that's this symbolism in the collapse of the wall of security at the Battle of Alamo after 13 days, which symbolizes America. So God is incorporating, in other words, the Battle of the Alamo into all of this, with the flooding in Wimberley, Texas, right near San Antonio. But God will incorporate the death of Paul Simon to crystallize all of the signs that are leading up to it, including the Battle of the Alamo. So let that sink in. This battle in the early 1800s is a prophetic sign that is part of the death of Paul Simon right now. That's how it's all working here. The past is coming to a climax, like I'm saying. And the connections between God's prophetic signs is only being explained on this channel. This sort of thing involving, for example, the Battle of the Alamo and how it connects to Paul Simon. because the Battle of the Alamo was sieged and the walls collapsed after 13 days. Simon now lives near the Battle of the Alamo, and he was born on the 13th of the month, and he has a song, America, and America was founded on 13 colonies, and you get the idea here now. So the Kerr County flooding, and the flooding again, there was all these 13s. 13 people died. The flood stage for that river was 13 feet, and it ultimately rose to the 13th prime number level of feet. The Kerr County flooding was, now this is nearby. This is near Wimberley, Texas. It's just like a few miles away. The Kerr County flooding, Texas, not the Wimberley, Texas flooding, was said to have been a wall of water that overcame the camps situated along the river. The quote-unquote wall of water was the result of the rising 2 times 13 feet high in less than an hour. Okay, so that's the main headline, if you will, of the story of the Kerr County flooding, was how it rose 26 feet in less than an hour. It was a wall of water, which caught the people in the river basin by surprise. All right, so it was, but 26 is 2 times 13. In other words, 13 plus 13. But this is also prophetic because of Ezra 2:13, which gives us the number 666 and its association with the name of a man, which is Adonikam. And the name Adonikam is equal to the same numeric value as the name Barack Obama. 408 in Hebrew gematria and 68 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. Now, in other words, God used the name in this Old Testament book to identify the Antichrist. Now, Ezra, the book of Ezra, is about rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. So that's why the wall of water, 2 times 13 feet, Ezra 2:13, the book of Ezra being about the walls. Okay, now 2 times 13 feet hints at the Battle of the Alamo and a second Wimberley flooding in which the water rose a record 13th prime number of feet, well above the 13 feet flood stage, and killed 13 people. Because again, the Battle of the Alamo siege was for 13 days, and then the walls of security were collapsed, or rather the Mexican army overcame the walls. All right, so in short, we are establishing the connection between Paul Simon and the Kerr County flooding, because the Kerr County flooding was right near the flooding in Wimberley. I just paused the video there at 13 seconds by coincidence. And again, the Wimberley flooding was about the number 13, and so is Paul Simon. His birth year, which is relevant, as I'll explain, the 13th of the month. And him being the singer of America, 13 colonies. Okay. So Paul Simon is from New York City. He moved to Wimberley, Texas with his wife, Edie Brickell, who is from Texas. Paul Simon's biggest hit was Bridge Over Troubled Water. Okay, that's obviously relevant here because we are talking about this troubled water flooding in Kerr County and also in Wimberley, Texas. And again, the Kerr County flooding is connected to the Wimberley, Texas flooding through that famous human interest story, which is that one of the volunteers lost his entire family in the Wimberley, Texas flooding, which is nearby. Wimberley, Texas is right near Kerr County. Both of them are also right near San Antonio, where the Battle of the Alamo is. The only hit for Edie Brickell. So Paul Simon married Edie Brickell, the famous singer from the band Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians. And her only hit, which was a massive hit, was What I Am. Moses led the Israelites across the Red Sea, which was a bridge over troubled water. And literally it was a bridge because it is a land bridge. They crossed the Gulf of Aqaba from the Nuweiba beach, which is rooted in the Arabic Moses crossing. Moses parted Moses waters. That's the meaning of the name Nuweiba. Anyway, long story short, that's another video subject. But right there is a land bridge, a shallow land bridge, and on each side of it, the cliff drops off to a deep Gulf of Aqaba. There's all kinds of evidence on each side right where that land bridge is, and including underneath the water of chariot wheels, etc., of the crossing there. So it was a bridge. It was a bridge over troubled water, literally, because it was a land bridge when the waters parted. Now, also, the Jordan River parted, and that too was a bridge over troubled water when the Israelites entered the Promised Land. And God told Moses, and this is, of course, the story of Moses, the Exodus. God told Moses that his name is I Am. The chorus of What I Am, okay, so that's what the name of the song What I Am hints at. See how it all comes together? In other words, the marriage of Edie Brickell and Paul Simon is ultimately for this purpose that I'm explaining in this video, that is only being explained in this video. What I Am is for the purpose of this flooding in Kerr County that points to Paul Simon and bridge over troubled water symbolism. But get this, the chorus of the song What I Am contains the words or verse, choke me in the shallow water before I get too deep. What? Choke me in the shallow water before I get too deep. That's a reference to a river of water. Shallow water. It's not the ocean. It's not a lake. Choke me in the shallow water. Choke me in the what does that even mean? What it means is that it's a prophetic sign that points to the deaths that occurred in these flooding incidents in Wimberley and Kerr County. So that's why Paul Simon married Edie Brickell. Okay, so as I wrote, which hints at the tragic deaths in the flooding in Hill Country, Texas in 2015 and 2025. Many people were rescued in the evacuation in the Kerr County flooding, which hints at Simon's bridge over troubled water. So that too is a symbolism for the bridge over troubled water because there was many rescues. Additionally, the couple's sale, so Simon and Brickell's sale of their mansion in New Canaan, Connecticut, as in the Promised Land, as in crossing the troubled water over the Jordan River and the Red Sea. Okay, so, and this is Brickell and Simon's mansion, okay, in New Canaan, Connecticut, because of course the Canaanites lived in the Promised Land before the Israelites took control of the Promised Land, okay? So before they moved to Wimberley, there was a prophetic sign, which I knew at the time, back in 2022, all right? I've been studying and watching the Paul Simon signs for years now. And this sign goes way back. It was recognized at the time because Paul Simon is all about the mansion, because he sings about the Graceland mansion in the album Graceland. So that's another subject I'll explain in other videos. But that's why it was alerted to me that this sale that was a news story of their mansion is relevant. And again, it was in New Canaan, Connecticut. And we're talking about What I Am and troubled water and choke me in the shallow water. And okay, now, and so, okay, before, and they sold the mansion in order to move to Wimberley. So in other words, the sale of the mansion pointed to the current residence of this couple in Wimberley, which ultimately points to the flooding in Wimberley and the Kerr County flooding and the Battle of the Alamo, as I'm explaining and have explained. There's more to say about how Wimberley is connected to the Battle of the Alamo and San Antonio. And that has to do with Wembanyama, the star player for San Antonio, the basketball team. And basketball involves keys, as does music, and Wembanyama hints at Obama, and on and on. That's another story, though, which is explained in other videos. Okay, so back to the subject, though. That's the sale of this mansion, which is a prophetic sign, because it points to Wimberley, their new residence. Because Paul Simon is not from Texas. Why is he moving to Texas? Well, because Edie Brickell is from Texas. So their new Canaan mansion is known for having a waterfall, a stream, and a pond. Now, the mansions, the story, the reason why it became a news story is because it took a very long time for them to sell. And the original asking price was 13 million something. So another 13, which points to Wimberley, which points to San Antonio and the 13-day siege of the Alamo. One intermediate price, like the price they lowered it before then lowering it again, was 11.9 million. God pairs 9 and 11 frequently in his signs to point to 9/11 and 2001, but also Revelation 9/11, which is symbolic of the bridge that the demons will cross from the bottomless pit into the earthly realm. When the door is opened with a key, and again, music involves keys, the word key is equal to 41 in simple English gematria. Simon was born in 41. That's why. Because it's pointing to the key in Revelation 9/11, which is part of the 7 trumpets of judgment that follow the period of silence in heaven. Simon's most recent album is 7 Psalms, and he is known for his hit Late in the Evening, which in itself is a title that hints at judgment, which is known for heavily using trumpets. So 7 trumpets. So anyway, that's why the 11.9 it related to Simon, because of Revelation 9/11, because of Simon being his biggest hit, Bridge Over Troubled Water, and the key to the door. Anyway, it's explained. That's more explained in other videos as well, what I just explained. The main story in the Kerr County flooding is the tragedy at Mystic Camp. So this is the main story of the Kerr County flooding. What happened at the Mystic Camp, the camp named Mystic Camp. As of today, and for the majority of time since the flooding, the death count at Mystic Camp is 28. Okay, this number will maybe increase because of the, but this is the number during the days following the prophetic sign. So even if it does increase, there were a number of days in which the prophetic sign was in the news, in which the death toll was 28 at Mystic Camp. Well, 28 is 7 times 24. The story is about Texas, so you might know this tragedy as the Texas flooding. The story is about Texas. It includes the governor of Texas in his remarks. For example, Texas is the 7 times 4th state. Okay? So 28 deaths, 7 times 4 deaths, 28th state, 7 times 4th state, and the date of the flooding was 7/4. Genesis 7:4 regards the warning God gave Noah regarding the flooding and judgment and destruction, as I explained at the beginning of the video. 7/4 is 7 times 4 days before it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. The story of Kerr County flooding was the warning that was not properly heeded. Simon's death will be a massive warning of impending judgment for America. Part of the warnings from God to America that have not been heeded. Paul Simon is not only a famous singer, but he is famous for the songs that he wrote himself. Important in music is the key, the music key. The word key is equal to 41 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. Keys open doors. The 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the symbol for a door. Okay, by the way, the word for that letter is dalat, from which we got delta, the 4th letter in the Greek alphabet, from which we got the word door. So the word door comes from the 4th letter, so 4 symbolizes door in God's signs. Simon, because he composes music, therefore is symbolic of the key, was born in 41. And the word key is equal to 41 in simple English gematria. And he was born on the 13th of the month. The 13th prime number is 41. Simon lives in Wimberley, Texas. The flooding in Wimberley occurred when the river rose to a record 41 feet, well beyond the 13-foot stage, and it killed 13 people. The Wimberley flooding occurred exactly the 4 plus 4th prime number times 10 weeks, in other words, 190 weeks, before Simon had his mystical dream that inspired him to compose the album Seven Psalms. And that dream occurred in Wimberley. And we have the 4 here, because 4 is symbolic of door, which is symbolic of Simon. If I didn't explain that more, door is the same symbolism in God's signs as bridge, and Simon's biggest hit was Bridge Over Troubled Water. And that's, of course, what we're talking about, as I explained earlier, with the Kerr County flooding, the Bridge Over Troubled Water. So that's the 4. So it's the 4 times 4th prime number. Add a 0, you get this exact number of weeks between the Wimberley flooding and Simon's mystical dream, which was in Wimberley. And that dream, as I mentioned, it didn't inspire him, it instructed him. He heard a voice in the dream telling him to produce an album and to name it Seven Psalms. When journalists come to interview him in his studio, he shows them the framed piece of paper on the wall that he wrote on after the dream. He tells, in other words, he always speaks of the dream in the interviews regarding his new album. The theme of the album is death and transitioning into the afterlife. In turn, Seven Psalms is exactly 239 times 10, in other words, 239 and a 0 days before Simon's predicted death on August 1st. What I meant by that was the release of the album, okay? The release of the album was 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days after the dream. So let me just explain it again here. Vision in your mind a diagram. It's not complicated, that's why I won't do an actual diagram. From the Wimberley flooding, we have this 4 plus 4th prime number connection to the dream in Wimberley. From the Wimberley flooding to the Wimberley dream, we have the 4 plus 4th prime number, exact weeks, okay? Then from the dream, it is 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days to the release of the album. God pairs the numbers 23, 9, and 44. So 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days, that follows the 4 plus 4th prime number of weeks connection, gets us to the release of the album, which then gives us a 23 and a 9, which with this 239 plus a 0 days to Simon's predicted death. Okay? Now, the reason for pairing 9, 23, and 44 is the 44th president was the basketball president who wore 23 in high school and was inaugurated in 09. Now, to confirm his signs and connections, God pairs 9, 23, and 44, as I explained. And by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9, 23, and 44. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from more than full-time hours, from morning until night, for more than 7 years. All right, now, so here we go again. So from the Wimberley flooding, we have a 4 plus 4th prime number of exact weeks, followed by 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days, to the release of the album. No. I apologize. Whoops. So it wasn't from the release of the album. It's from the dream. This 239 plus 0 days is from the actual date of the dream. So never mind everything else that I've said. We've got simply a 4 plus 4th prime number of weeks to the dream in Wimberley from the Wimberley flooding. And then we have the 239 connection to the predicted death of Paul Simon. And that's a straightforward pairing of 9, 23, and 44, which confirms the signs and connections. This is how the structure of God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. Okay? Now, so also 239 is the 52nd prime number. And the word door is equal to 52 in simple English gematria. 4 equals door, as I explained. So you have the 4 plus 4th prime number connecting to, followed by the connection that hints at door. And door equals 4. By the way, Kerr County, Kerr has 4 letters. So Kerr County, the word Kerr is not only 4 letters, but it is also equal to 52 in simple English gematria, just like the word door, which, by the way, also has 4 letters, which, by the way, hints at 44 and the 44th president. In other words, this connection that involves Simon's mystical dream, the 4 plus 4th prime number, and the 52nd prime number, hints at the door to heaven. And again, the theme of the album is crossing over the bridge, as in bridge over troubled water, into the afterlife. That's the theme of the album. This hints at the door to heaven, which is why Simon will die at the end of this trail, with the 4 plus 4th prime number of weeks, followed by the 239 plus 0 days. Okay, you got the idea here, right? All right. Before I move on, I'll just say this quickly, because it is explained in more detail in another video. But again, the release of the album was 4 years, 4 months, and 4 days after the dream. The dream was on the date 115. The album was released exactly 115 weeks before the predicted death of Paul Simon. That's because, long story short, as explained in another video, through Paul Simon, God is pointing to the book of Amos, chapter 1, which has 15 verses, which is why the date 115 for his prophetic dream, that was from God. Now, the 15 verses of this first chapter of Amos, and Amos has 4 letters. Paul also has 4 letters. This chapter repeats this Hebrew idiom phrase for 3 transgressions and for 4. It's an idiom that means the tolerable limit of sin has been exceeded and judgment, destruction is unavoidable. That's also the main reason why God is associating the number 4 with Paul Simon. It's for this 3 transgressions and for 4 Hebrew idiom. Talks about the unavoidable judgment for Israel, which America is God's second Israel, the current Israel, the Gentile nation. So the judgment is coming like it was promised for ancient Israel. It's interesting that we have this phrase for 3 transgressions and for 4, because Paul Simon and Garfunkel's first album was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week. That gives us a 3 and a 4. Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. 4th day of the week, 3 a.m. That's the album on which the original acoustic version of Sound of Silence was on. All right, now. And that album, by the way, was released in 1964, and 64 is 4 times 4 times 4. Incidentally, the stock market is predicted to peak at 6,400 and then crash in its biggest crash in history, in conjunction with this Simon death, which will point to the Sound of Silence that was released in 64. Hence why the stock market will peak at 6,400. And this will also be in conjunction with the birthday, the 64th birthday of the 44th president. Again, 64 is 4 times 4 times 4. Now, in other words, this connection that involves Simon's mystical dream, the 4 plus 4th prime number and the 52nd prime number, which again hints at door, because door is equal to 52, it hints at the door to heaven, which is opened with a key, which is why Simon was born in 41, because key equals 41 in simple English gematria. Okay, and keys open doors. Also, this 115 weeks connection, which confirms the date of the dream on 115, which confirms Amos 115. The number 115 is the 37th semi-prime number, and God uses semi-prime numbers also. And semi-prime number is a number that is only divisible by 2 other prime numbers. The number 115 is the 37th semi-prime number. That's because God, through that, hints at, or is hinting at, Amos 3:7. Amos 3:7. For the Lord God does nothing without revealing his secret to his servants, the prophets. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a prophet. In fact, one of the reasons why I believe God has given me the responsibility for conveying his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is because I am not one of these people that claim to be a prophet. There are no prophets, and God would only, in my opinion, give someone the responsibility of his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections to someone that understands that there are no prophets today. Okay, prophets ceased once the biblical canon was complete. The purpose of prophets at one point was to confirm the word of God. That's no longer needed. There are no quote-unquote prophets today. Anyway, but God does nothing without first revealing his secrets to his servants. And I am one of his servants. And take this literally. It's meant to be taken literally. The doctrine of imminence, as I mentioned earlier, is false. It is heresy. It is from Satan. The most quoted verse in the Bible, no one knows the day, is false. It's mistranslated and misinterpreted, taken out of context as well. And it flatly, and that the mainstream interpretation of that is flatly contradicting many other passages in the Bible. Okay, so did God first reveal to his servants when the flood judgment would come, when the fire and brimstone would rain down on Sodom and Gomorrah? Did he not reveal these things ahead of time? And yes, he did, and he would do so again now. Did he not reveal to his wise men servants in the east, in Babylon, who would have been, by the way, Jews, who were studying the stars and looking for the signs? Did he not reveal to the Magi the timing of the first coming? Yes, he did, through prophecy and through watching for signs. Did Jesus command his disciples repeatedly to watch for the signs of his return? Which, by the way, if you were to ask the average quote-unquote Christian today if they could name one prophetic sign, they wouldn't even understand the question. That's how bad it is. And they would miss the obvious one, which is the Star of Bethlehem. But if the Star of Bethlehem revealed the timing, the precise timing of the first coming, wouldn't the Lord provide signs for the precise timing of the second coming? And wouldn't one of those signs be in the Bible, incidentally, like the Star of Bethlehem? In fact, there was. On September 23rd, 2017, the once in human lifetime, the once in human history alignment of the stars occurred that fulfilled the first verses of the book of Revelation, chapter 12, the great sign in heaven, which is about the Lord's second coming. Anyway, the Lord would reveal, like he is saying with Amos 3:7, the timing, the secrets, the timing. Why did Jesus say to watch? Obviously, watching is for the purpose of timing. Furthermore, Revelation 3:3, Jesus said, because he is speaking, therefore watch. Otherwise, if you do not watch, you will not know the hour in which I will come upon you. Therefore, if one is watching, they will know the hour. That's clear. It contradicts this false interpretation of Matthew 24:36, the most quoted verse in the Bible. And why is it the most quoted verse in the Bible? Because it is used by quote-unquote Christians as an excuse to not watch and to dismiss those that are watching, because it humiliates them when they realize that they don't know anything because they're not watching. This is why Jesus has a parable for Christians, which is the 10 bridesmaids. All of them are quote-unquote Christians. All of them are sleeping. Fortunately, half of them at least have enough oil to get through and make it to the Last Supper, the rapture. The other half didn't make it. But they were all not watching, and at the end of the parable, Jesus says, therefore watch. But they all fell asleep. Well, who was watching? If the bridesmaids weren't watching, who was watching? Well, that would be the bride. The bride, of course, is watching with keen interest the timing of her bridegroom's return. So the watchmen who have done away with the false doctrine that is the excuse to not watch are watching. Okay. So, and that's why and obviously the purpose of watching is for a purpose, and that's to learn the secrets that God is revealing to those who are wise and are watching. It's like the same thing as the wise men before the first coming. And let me repeat that. For God does nothing. I'll repeat that. Nothing without revealing first his secret to his servants. Okay, so God is revealing how important the death of Paul Simon is, and how important, for example, the topic of this video was, which is the Kerr County flooding. And that's the secret. Now, the knowledge of how to interpret these things is the result of years of studying from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years, the Lord's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, and slowly and incrementally being taught by God through the signs how it works and what's going on. Like I said earlier, it's been known that God is using Paul Simon for years, and other things like the pairing of 9, 23, and 44, like I mentioned a minute ago. These are like old school foundational things that were learned many years ago as to how the structure works of the true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. Which is why, for example, it is only on this channel, as far as I'm aware, that someone is talking about prophetic signs and not trying to fit them into the timing of the rapture. In other words, no one else is talking about these other things that God is communicating. The rapture is just one thing among countless other things that God is communicating. But the others, unfortunately, don't know this, and so the occasional sign that they recognize, but they don't know what to do with, because none of God's prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs. It's all interconnected, like the Bible is. The Bible isn't a linear document. One can pass through it in an infinite number of ways. It's all interconnected, all connects with itself. And so when that isn't recognized with the prophetic signs, likewise, the full meaning of the prophetic sign can't be understood, but they miss the vast majority of signs, but occasionally the other watchers are recognizing some signs, but they don't really know what to fully do with them because they're trying to fit them into some kind of timing for the rapture that is a few days from now, from the moment, from the timing of the sign. They're constantly looking for the rapture to be a few weeks at the most ahead of time, the next feast or something like that, and they're trying to fit the signs into that, but that's not how it's working. Anyway, on that note, when the prediction comes to pass, if you are a quote-unquote Christian, please know that it is your responsibility to never, ever stop sharing this video or some video on this channel. Be warned, which is a warning from Jesus coming after the parable about the rapture, the bridesmaids. Still speaking to Christians, Jesus spoke to the servants with different bags of gold, and the servant that did nothing with his one bag of gold, who was a Christian, a believer, was banished to hell. But if that's not enough warning for you, look at Ezekiel 3 and 33. Those who know what's coming, have knowledge, the watchers that do nothing and don't warn others, what happens to those people? The blood, the sin and the blood on their hands is on their hands. So, in other words, this video, this prediction, is like nothing else. There is no evangelism tool that compares to this prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. You must do things with it. It's not about me. It's not about making it's not even my channel. This is a prediction from God. I have this responsibility to relay the prediction. I didn't ask for this responsibility. And there you have it. You must work nonstop. And another thing you can do if you're interested, you can hand out the flyer. My flyer has all of the amazing information that people need right now. And now is not the time to hand out traditional, typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway. The sons of Issachar knew what to do because they knew the times that they were in. I think that's 1 Chronicles 14 or something. So you need to recognize the time that you're in, and now is not the time to hand out those traditional, typical tracts that says Jesus loves you, which is false. Okay, it's not true. It's misleading. Okay, the few times that God's love is mentioned in the Bible are always in context of those who are redeemed. All right, God also hates people in the Bible. Okay, so anyway, the evangelical culture, there's a lot of errors in it. But the point is my flyer will also point people to the channel. If you'd like the file, please contact me. I'll email it to you. You can give it to your printer. They'll know what to do with it. Print it out, make you the flyers. You can put them on. You can hand them out on busy street corners or put them on car windshields in busy parking lots or in mailboxes. All right, now, another thing that I wanted to say before moving on is that it's quite easy to actually connect Paul Simon to the book of Amos. I should have mentioned it. Because Wally Amos, the famous founder of famous Amos Cookies, was the agent that first signed Simon and Garfunkel. And he lured them into his office with cookies. Anyway, his death last year on the 9th of Av, for those who know what I'm talking about, was a prophetic sign. He died at the age of 88 because God is pointing to Revelation 8:1 and also Amos 8:1, which speaks of a basket of summer fruit, and August 1st, when Simon will die, is in the middle of the summer. Anyway, that's all explained in another video. I just wanted to clear up how we can connect easily to the book of Amos through the guy who signed Paul Simon, Wally Amos. Paul Simon is not only a famous singer, but he's famous for the songs that he wrote himself. In other words, what I mean by that is he's famous for writing the songs that he sang. He wrote the songs himself. Important in music composition is the music key. Wait a second, I already read this paragraph. Okay. Now, Revelation 8:1 begins with a sound of silence observed in heaven that is followed by the 7 trumpets of God's judgment and wrath. This is why Simon's death on 8:1, August 1st, is pointed to through Simon's prophetic mystical dream regarding a voice that instructed him to produce the album 7 Psalms. Okay, again, that's also 7 trumpets in Revelation chapter 8, which follows the Sound of Silence in Heaven. Okay? The flooding in Wimberley, Texas, where Simon's home is, was exactly 4 times 923 days before the 7 times 4 deaths in the Kerr County flooding and the tragedy at Mystic Camp in the 7 times 4th state on the date 7/4, which is 7 times 4 days before Simon's predicted death. Okay, so let me just rewind a bit here. Again, I mentioned in the last paragraph that God pairs 9, 23, and 44. So this is like a pairing of that. Okay, because this flooding in Wimberley, Texas, I mentioned the date earlier. If I remember correctly, it was May 26th, 2015. This date is exactly, or was exactly 4 times 923. So God repeats, 923 is obviously a pairing of 9 and 23, and it's repeated 4 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. All right. And again, the Kerr County flooding in turn in the 7 times 4th state on the date 7/4 connects with 7 times 4 days to Simon's predicted death. Now, the flooding on 7/4 hints at the 7-day warning God gave Noah before the flood in Genesis 7:4. The 7-day warning in Genesis 7:4 also hints at Simon's 7 Psalms album. Okay, that's, again, I mentioned this basically, I'm repeating myself a little bit. But the flooding, of course, in Kerr County on the date 7/4 was a prophetic sign that pointed to the warning of flooding in Genesis 7:4. All right, and it's a 7-day warning. And Paul Simon's album is 7 Psalms that he's currently promoting on his tour, Quiet Celebration, which also is a name that hints at the Sound of Silence in Heaven. To confirm his signs and connections, God pairs 9 and 44. As I mentioned earlier, this is a way in which he would make or develop a second witness to confirm a matter. It's the basic structure of God's big picture of signs. The 44th president was inaugurated in 2009. The flooding at Mystic Camp was said to begin around 4 a.m. on the 4th of July. Okay, that's a 44. The water level rose 9 plus 11 feet above flood stage in 90 minutes. This is specifically at Mystic Camp. Okay? The flood stage was at 9 plus 11 feet, and it rose to that height in 90 minutes. That is a 9 that pairs with the 4 a.m. flood on the 4th of July. A pairing of 9 and 44 that confirms the signs and connections. And this was 9 days after the prophetic signs on June 25th that also pointed to Paul Simon, as explained in the Paul Simon and basketball are the key email thread. Okay, there was a San Antonio basketball sign, long story short. I'll explain that in another video. One of the signs on June 25th was the 4 times 4th selection in the NBA draft by the Portland Trailblazers. All right, now, God is using Portland as symbolic of a portal, which is the same symbol as a door. And in Revelation 9:11, as in the 9 plus 11 feet rise of the river, is the opening of a door with a key. Basketball uses keys, and so does music. The opening of a door with a key from which the demons will cross over the bridge over troubled water, into the earthly realm from the bottomless pit. They will pass through the portal. Okay? The port door is symbolic of 4, like I explained earlier. The 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the symbol for a door. So that's why the 4 times 4th player selected by the team from Portland, which is symbolic of door, which equals 4. This was a news story. It's not just randomly the 4 times 4th player selected. There was a thing about it that made it very interesting for the news. It was this unheard of guy from obscure league in China. So, in other words, it was in the sports world, it was a major story, and he was the 4 times 4th player selected from Portland. Okay, now, that day, June 25th, which was also the day of San Antonio and therefore Wimberley, Texas, Paul Simon sign in the same NBA draft. The first player selected, in other words, was selected by San Antonio. No. Was it San Antonio? No. But it was connected to Paul Simon, as I explained in the video. It was in the 4 times 4th state. That's right. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, this day, June 25th, and the sign involving the 4 times 4th selected player was 444 days after the path of totality of the eclipse, which is what is hinted at with the name Trailblazers, right? The sun blazes a trail, the path of totality, right, of the eclipse. Okay, so again, the 4 times 4th selected player was 9 days before the flooding, in which the river rose in 90 minutes, okay? But so the 9 days back, then another 444 days back. So again, 9 days back to the 4 times 4th selected player. The first player was selected by the team from the 4 times 4th state. And then 444 days back from that was the day of the eclipse, which is hinted at with the name Trailblazers. Okay, and that the eclipse passed over the path of totality of the other eclipse in 2017, where it peaked, and that eclipse first entered the U.S. in Oregon near Portland. But this other eclipse, which was April 8th, 2024, 444 days before the 4 times 4th selected player from Portland, and the prophetic first player, who was also a prophetic sign, who was selected from the 4 times 4th state. And by the way, the prophetic sign is that he comes from the 23rd state, a small town. Okay, the story of him is all about how he's from Maine, a small town in Maine, and how on the draft day, the people in his town were all gathered together in the auditorium and all that. So it's all about the 23rd state, which is a pairing of 23 and 44. As I mentioned earlier, God uses to confirm the signs and connections. All right, so we're getting back to this other eclipse now. So what's with the other eclipse? The one in April 2024, 444 days before the 4 times 4th player selected by the Trailblazers, which is symbolic of an eclipse. What happened is that this eclipse, the 2024 eclipse, it first entered the U.S. over Eagle Pass, Texas. So the other eclipse is also pointed to with Trailblazers, and it first entered over Portland or near Portland. And the other eclipse, it first entered the U.S. over this town or city, Eagle Pass. It's not plural. That's a typo. Eagle Pass, Texas, which hints at Paul Simon's hit, which, by the way, is the 4th released song from the album Bridge Over Troubled Water, the song El Condor Pasa. Right? That means the condor passes, as in Eagle Pass. An El Condor is the same thing as an eagle. Eagle Pass, El Condor. But after the eclipse entered over Eagle Pass, which hinted at Paul Simon, it passed over San Antonio and Wimberley, Texas, where Paul Simon is. Okay? Eagle Pass, Texas, and Wimberley, Texas, or I should say the Eagle Pass, Texas, and Wimberley, Texas eclipse was 4 times 4 times 4 weeks, not only 444 days before the basketball sign, but it was also 4 times 4 times 4 weeks, in other words, 64 weeks, and 4 days before the Mystic Camp flooding on the 4th of July that began at 4 a.m., which saw the water rise in 90 minutes, which pairs with the 4 times 4 times 4 weeks and 4 days, and the 4 a.m. on the 4th of July. So that's amazing beyond words. And again, Paul Simon is associated with the number 4, and so this eclipse that went over Wimberley, Texas, and Eagle Pass that pointed to Paul Simon is associated with the number 4 because of bridge over troubled water. And bridge is the same symbolism as a door, and the door is the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the symbol for the door. But also, as I explained earlier, because of Amos, the first chapter, the phrase that's repeated for 3 transgressions and for 4. Now, so we're really connecting, in other words, we're really confirming the connection between Paul Simon and the Kerr County flooding and the Mystic Camp flooding. By the way, this is a Christian camp, and America is God's Christian nation, or it was. And God is primarily focused on judgment on the church, the American church, specifically also the American evangelical church, because God reproves whom he loves. But God is very, very displeased with the American evangelical church. Anyway, that's why this judgment sign on the Christian mystic camp. Anyway, so back to what I was saying here. The Eagle Pass, Texas, and Wimberley, Texas eclipse was 444 plus 444% of a year, a calendar year, after the Wimberley flooding in 2015. Okay, now I just explained how the eclipse connected to the Kerr County flooding with 4 times 4 times 4 weeks and 4 days, but also the Wimberley eclipse was itself 444 plus 444% of a year after the Wimberley flooding. In other words, I've just connected with the number 4, the Wimberley flooding, to the Kerr County flooding. And again, they are right near each other. So again, the Kerr County flooding connects with Paul Simon, who lives in Wimberley. Also, this is 888, by the way, which is the number of Jesus, the name in Jesus in Greek gematria. And of course, everything is about Jesus. And Jesus is the coming judge in the book of Revelation. On the day of the Eagle Pass, Texas, and Wimberley, Texas eclipse was a prophetic sign involving the basketball player named Wembanyama, which is at Wimberley, and Obama, who plays for San Antonio, Texas. The sign was the first commercial of him being sponsored by Nike. And his nickname is the Alien, and the commercial was a big crop circle of an alien crop circle. And that's because ultimately what's going to happen is that when the demons cross over the bridge, as in bridge over troubled water, into the earthly realm through the door that's opened with a key, they will pretend to be aliens. These demons will pretend to be aliens, which is why the Wembanyama sign, and Obama will promote the aliens. The aliens will make Pope Francis, the resurrected Pope Francis, who will be resurrected in 2029 in the 4th month of the year, and they will claim, or he will claim that he is the ambassador for the world for the aliens, and he will hand his power to Obama, the second of the two antichrists, the 44th president. And again, the door is is synonymous with 4, and the demons will come through the door. Okay, now Obama is the basketball president, which is another reason why we have the Wembanyama sign and why he plays for San Antonio, because it hints at the Wembley, and Obama, the basketball president, and who is the 44th president. Obama changed his name from Barry to Barack. And who does that, by the way? What American changes his name from a good American name to Barack? The conditions, except for someone who is anti-American and a communist, which is the truth. He is a communist, and once a communist, always a communist. He was a communist and was a member of the May 19th Communist Organization in his early years. So the conditions for the Kerr County flooding were the result of Tropical Storm Barry. All this was initiated by Tropical Storm Barry. The basketball signs on June 25th that pointed to Simon were 444 plus 444 hours before Simon's predicted death in Wimberley, Texas. So we already had an 888, but we have another one. The signs here on June 25th that pointed to Paul Simon, which is explained in another video, but you get the idea, as I've explained already. That's 888 hours, in other words, 37 days, which is 444 plus 444 hours before Simon's predicted death in Wimberley, Texas. The signs on June 25th were 130.41% of a year. After Paul Simon related signs on March 6th, 2024. So this was a Paul Simon date, a step in the trail of Paul Simon signs. And that's astounding because of this connection, 130.41% of a year, because 130.41% of a year hints at Paul Simon's birth date, the date 10, 13, and 41. 130 is 13 times 10. The date 10, 13, and 41. 130.41. Okay? The Simon-related signs on March 6th, 2024 were exactly 188 years after the 13-day siege and the collapse of the wall of security at the Battle of Alamo in San Antonio, Texas. And God uses frequently the number 188 in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections because H188 in the Hebrew concordance is the word that means woe, exclamation mark, used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. The first of the woes in the book of Revelation is the demons crossing over the bridge into the earthly realm. In other words, when they cross over the bridge from the bottomless pit into the earthly realm, it'll be because the wall of security separating the two realms has collapsed. Which is why God is pointing to, through God's signs, the Battle of the Alamo and the 13-day siege and the collapse of the walls of security. So let me explain that. From the end of the siege, it is exactly 188 years to the signs on March 6, 2024, and that in turn connects with the Paul Simon date percentage of a year to the signs on June 25th, which connect with 444 plus 444 hours before Paul Simon's predicted death. Okay, and Paul Simon door equals 4, as does the bridge from the bottomless pit. As that's why the walls of security collapse symbolism in the Battle of the Alamo. There's another 180 years connection to confirm this, by the way. The only other time a foreign enemy attacked the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., was exactly 188 years before 9/11, when the British landed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate, and then proceeded to burn down the Capitol and the White House, but not before Dolly Madison rescued the portrait of George Washington. All right, I apologize for this diagram. The apology is that this diagram is my rough notes. This, in other words, is a diagram that I made for my personal understanding, and it's, not neat and tidy, but I think it's fairly legible. But what I'm going to do is go through it with you and explain it. So it doesn't even matter really how messy it is, because I'll be explaining it and you'll understand. So, and I'll just do that rather than make this into a nicer diagram. I could do that, but it would take some time, and we don't have a lot of time. Well, here is this connection that I was talking about. This date 8/1 is the predicted date that Paul Simon will die, August 1st, 2025. This is the day of the end of the 13-day siege at the Battle of the Alamo, when the wall of security was breached. Very prophetic, wall of security, book of Joshua. Very important theme in the Bible, wall of security, right? So we talked about this already at length, the significance of the 13 days and Paul Simon and America, 13 colonies, and on, right? Now, I also just explained the 188 years connection to this date here, in which there were prophetic signs, which is explained in another video. There were baby boomer music signs. There was an Eagles sign, had to do with the lawsuit over the original paper that the song Hotel California was written on, and also the Doobie Brothers. It was all part of that baby boomer generation music, and it all related to Paul Simon, but that's in another video. I also mentioned this 130.41%. Again, Paul Simon was born in 41 on the date 1013. 10 times 13 is 130. All right, and 41 is the 13th prime number. I explained all that. That got us to this day here with the basketball signs that relate to Paul Simon, as I explained. And then we have this 37 days, which is since you got 3 sets of 7 and walls of security, because of the symbolic 3 sets of 7 that the Israelites enacted before the walls of security of Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. Paul Simon associated with number 4, as I've explained. This is also the equivalent of 444 plus 444 hours, 888 hours. All right. Now, this is the wall of water, the flooding. This is the topic of this video, the Mystic Camp. I'm not done explaining it. This is the middle point in a way. There's lots more to come. Very profound. Anyway, the wall of water rose in 90 minutes, like we were saying, and it was 9 days after this basketball sign. And that sign involved 44, and so God pairs 44 and 9 to confirm the signs and connections, and on, as I've already explained. And again, this was 444 days back to the eclipse that went over Eagle Pass, as in El Condor Pasa, the 4th song released from the Bridge Over Troubled Water album. And also the eclipse then went over Wimberley, Texas, as well as San Antonio. And again, this is 4 times 4 times 4 weeks exactly to the wall of water. All right, which is right near Wimberley, the Kerr County flooding. And I've already explained the connections between the two floodings, the Kerr County and the Wimberley flooding, which, by the way, is this date right here, which is 888% of a year. So you have 888% of a year between the Wimberley flooding and the Wimberley eclipse, and then 444 days, and then another 888 hours. And 888 is 444 plus 444. So in other words, you've got 444 plus 444, then 444 days, then 444 plus 444 hours. Okay. Now, this is also 3,240 days, and 324 is the 6 plus 6 plus 6th square number. Square equals 4. 6 plus 6, 666 is the number of the Antichrist. The number 13 symbolizes the Antichrist because the 13th generation from Noah, Nimrod, was a type for the Antichrist. And also Haman, a type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 13th days of the month. And the two Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation, chapter 13. Anyway, again, this flooding, the flood stage was 13 feet, and it rose to the 41-foot level, which is the 13th prime number, and 13 people died. Paul Simon is associated with 13 because of his song and his birth date, America, 13 colonies. I've already explained all of that. So you get the idea? That's amazing. Do you see that? This Wimberley flooding connects profoundly, if you got that, to the day it is predicted that Paul Simon will die. All right? Now again, the flooding in Kirk County, as I've explained on the date 7-4, is 7 times 4 days to the predicted date of Paul Simon's death. And it was in the 7 times 4th state. And the big story is the 7 times 4 deaths in the Mystic Camp, the tragedy in the Mystic Camp. All right, and the story, one of the biggest stories is how the owner and head counsel, not the head counselor, the owner, the president of the Mystic Camp, sacrificed his life rescuing little girls. His name is Eastland, and I'll explain more in a minute, actually. I'll just save that, but he's part of the sign here too. It's very important. Now, and of course, the flooding began at 7 a.m., 4th of July. That's 4 4s there, confirming the 4 times 4 times 4 weeks, for example, from the Wimberley, Texas, and the Eagle Pass eclipse, which again hints at Paul Simon, because he lives in Wimberley, and of course, the El Condor song, El Condor Pasa song, which is the 4th song released from the Bridge Over Troubled Water. As in Bridge Over Troubled Water, this is what this is, this flooding, this troubled water, the rescues, bridge, okay? Now, let's see. This date here is the date of Paul Simon's dream, in which he was instructed to make the album 7 Psalms and name it 7 Psalms. This is 1,190 days. That's profound because it hints at 9/11. God uses combinations of 9 and 2 1s to hint at 9/11, but also not just 9/11 and 2001, but the 5th trumpet judgment, which is symbolized in God's signs by Revelation 9:11. And that 5th trumpet involves a bridge from which the demons will cross over from the demonic realm, the bottomless pit, as it says in the chapter, to the earthly realm. And Paul Simon's part of that because, of course, the trumpets follow the sound of silence in heaven, and also Bridge Over Troubled Water is Simon Garfunkel's last and 5th album, and it is the 5th trumpet, which we have the bridge metaphor. We know that because of the key that opens the door, because keys open doors, and the number and the bridge is the same symbolism in God's signs as the door. Okay. Now, we have a straight connection here from the Wimberley flooding. It is, like I mentioned earlier, 4 times 923 days, and God pairs the numbers 44, 9, and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections. And he furthermore just pairs 9 and 23. So that's why that's profound. And again, that connects to the 4 a.m. 4th of July flooding in 90 minutes, right? So that's a 44 right there, and that pairs with the 923, which is 4 of them. Okay. From the Wimberley flooding, we have a connection to Simon's dream in Wimberley, because he was in Wimberley at the time. Again, when he has the interviewers, the journalists in his studio in Wimberley, interviewing him about his new album, he shows them the framed piece of paper on the wall on which he wrote after the dream. And the dream is dated. It's this date 115, which, as I explained earlier, hints at Amos 1:15, or rather Amos chapter 1, which has 15 verses. And that's because of the repetition of the Hebrew idiom in the chapter for 3 transgressions and for 4, which means the tolerable limit of sin has been exceeded and judgment and destruction is now unavoidable. Okay? So that 3 transgressions and for 4 is another way or why Paul Simon is associated with the number 4. Okay? And this is the 4 plus 4th prime number connection, as I explained earlier. 119 weeks. 19 is the 4 plus 4th prime number, which connects with this, and the idiom that points to the number 4. And God pairs 44, 9, and 23, like I've explained. And that's why this dream is 2,390 days, which hints at 23 and 9, before Paul Simon's predicted death. 239 is also the 52nd prime number, and 52 is equal to door, the word door, in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. Also, the word Kerr, as in Kerr County. This is amazing beyond words, by the way. Kerr County is prophetic, and you would think that it would be if this is truly a prophetic sign that points to this big picture of signs involving Paul Simon, as I'm explaining. First of all, it has 4 letters. That's enough in itself. But the word Kerr is also equal to 52 in simple English gematria, the same as the door, which is the same symbolism as a bridge, as in bridge over troubled water. Okay, and yeah, well, I think that's it for this diagram. Okay. It has been known for a few years that the sale of Paul Simon and Edie Brickell's mansion in New Canaan, Connecticut, was a prophetic sign. 4 equals door. The 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the symbol for a door. 4 days after the Kerr County flooding, and again, Kerr is equal to 52 in simple English gematria, as is the word door, Paul Simon's daughter posted hateful words directed at Richard Gere for his supposed broken promise to take care of her childhood home. I'm not sure if I'm going to make another video regarding this, but this was a news story. It was a fairly big news story. I mean, not in like terms of national news, but I mean, if you got into like the people.com type news, maybe it was even in other news outlets. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it would have been in like the mainstream media and other outlets too. It was a big enough news story. Anyway, this story broke 4 days after the Kerr County flooding. And again, I've been explaining how it's all about the door and the number 4, because of also the for 3 transgressions and for 4, which, by the way, I didn't elaborate in the diagram. That also is the reason for, as I mentioned probably earlier, Paul Simon's first album with Art Garfunkel named Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week. That gives us a 3 and a 4. And so that's why it hints at for 3 transgressions and for 4, this repeating idiom in Amos chapter 1 verse that has 15 verses. And again, that's all pointed to the book of Amos through Wally Amos, the founder of famous Amos Cookies, who signed Simon and Garfunkel, the first agent to sign them, and he lured them into his office through cookies. He died at the age of 88, which hints at Revelation chapter 8, which is again the death of Paul Simon will hint at, Revelation 8:1, and the sound of silence in heaven, and then the trumpet judgments that follow. And it also points to Amos chapter 8, verse 1, which is the description of a basket of summer fruit. And Simon's predicted death on 8:1 will be in the middle of summer, which is when they'll have typically baskets of summer fruit. And and on and on. So, okay, back to what I was saying here, though. We're talking about now this media post that the daughter of Paul Simon posted regarding the prophetic mansion, because the prophetic mansion has known to be a prophetic mansion for years. Okay, and then just the other day we had another sign involving the mansion, so that's why I knew immediately that it was a prophetic sign regarding Paul Simon. It was a prophetic sign, given that Paul Simon's death is just a few days away, and of course, having known previously that the mansion is prophetic. All right, and again, that's related to the Graceland mansion, which Paul Simon sings about, which is ultimately also hinting at the White House mansion in which the Antichrist will dwell, the 44th president. Number 4 again, okay? Now, and by the way, the address of the mansion, the White House mansion, by the way, I haven't said this enough in the videos, the address is 4 times 400. It's 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, okay? So that's 4 times 400. That's another 44. Pennsylvania is the second state because that's hinting at the second presidency for the 44th president. All right, also the White House mansion has 132 rooms. 132 is 44 plus 44 plus 44. Okay. Back to what I'm saying, though, about this mansion, Paul Simon and Edie Brickell's mansion in New Canaan, Connecticut, as in the Promised Land. And a bridge over water, troubled water, in other words, the Israelites over the Jordan River into the Promised Land. And for that matter, also the Red Sea. Okay, so this sign occurred 4 days after the troubled water in the Kerr County flooding. Simon's daughter and the hateful words she posted. Now, Richard Gere is symbolic in God's signs of the movie Chicago, which God uses to point to the Antichrist, who is from Chicago, because of the big movie named Chicago in 2002. And there's more connections to confirm that, but I don't recall them offhand. Well, anyway, so that's Richard Gere symbolism there, the movie Chicago. And okay, so supposedly he promised that he would take care of the home, but then what happened? Do I write it here? He sold the home just recently, and he sold it to a developer that's going to trash the mansion and subdivide it into, I think it's 8 lots. I could be wrong. It might be 9 lots. If it's 9 is the most important number in God's signs, as from the Bible. It symbolizes judgment, and that's what Paul Simon's death will hint at, the judgment of the trumpets in Revelation chapter 8. Well, anyway, the post included a description of Gere being haunted by spirits to the point of madness. Well, that's the 5th trumpet. When the demons cross over the bridge into the earthly realm through the unlocked door that's unlocked with a key, and music involves keys, like I've said, and music is, well, okay, and here's the thing. Music is frequencies. And the demons that will cross over from the bottomless pit in the 5th trumpet, and again, Paul Simon's 5th album is Bridge Over Troubled Water. They'll cross the bridge, the demons. They will then demonically possess people who will seek death for, as it says in the prophecy, 5 months. They will be demonically possessed through frequencies. 5G frequencies will trigger delta brainwaves, delta being the 4th letter in the Greek alphabet. Delta brainwaves will be triggered by the 5G frequencies in those people who have taken the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing that has components inside it that have gone into their brains that will then be facilitated or triggered with the 5G frequencies that will trigger delta brainwaves. 4, as in bridge, as in door, the demonic realm. They will demonically possess people, the masses of people who have taken the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing. And you know what I'm talking about. And it is the thing. It does not need an additional technology to go with it. It already has it. But also it does not need a form of false religious worship to go with it. For those who are wise, it did involve a false form of religious worship. And it does not need an additional supposed new age of dispensation. In fact, in which all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the main reasons why the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is that it is a judgment for this particular doctrine, which is the Nicolaitan doctrine that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And so that's what's alluded to here with this description in her hateful post towards Gere, which hints at the Antichrist, who is from Chicago, who will enforce the mark of the Antichrist. She writes about how haunted, and mansions are known for their hauntings, okay? She writes about him, Gere, being haunted as punishment by spirits to the point of madness. What in the world is she talking about? Is she Christian or what? I doubt it. But she's obviously speaking prophetically because she's exactly talking about the 5th trumpet here. People being haunted or possessed by spirits to the point of madness because of which they will seek death for 5 months and not be able to reach death. Which is why, incidentally, Paul Simon recently performed with a member of the band Grateful Dead after he knocked on the door of the band. That's another story. He knocked on the door in the 1960s of the home of the Grateful Dead in San Francisco. I made a video about this already, so I shouldn't repeat myself. But, and then the guy who answered the door, Bob Weir, he became friends with ever since, and then he appeared at a concert recently in San Francisco with Paul Simon, and on and on. And the concert's name is Outside Lands, as in the demonic realm, as in the bottomless pit, in the 5th trumpet judgment, in Golden Gate Park, as in door, as in bridge, okay? Anyway, so the news regarding the sale of Simon's mansion is confirmation that the Kerr County flooding, because this is all about the sale, the prophetic sign of Edie Brickell's and Paul Simon's mansion, which, by the way, is known for its waterfall and a stream and pond, okay, as in Bridge Over Troubled Water. And Edie Brickell, of course, is known for her song that goes and repeats in the chorus, "Choke me in the shallow water," as I mentioned. It's Bridge Over Troubled Water symbolism. Okay, her mansion is part of that. Okay, and so anyway, the sign was involving the sale, which the reason why it was a story, a news story, is because it took so long to sell. And one of the points in which they brought down their price after a while to 11.9 million, and that's hinting at Revelation 9:11, the fifth trumpet, which is about the demonic possession. And here we have the daughter talking about demonically possessing Richard Gere, who is symbolism for the Antichrist. And to the point of madness. Okay, this is crazy. This is amazing. This is amazing. God is the ultimate artist. He is the master creative genius. Okay, so the news regarding the sale of Simon's mansion is confirmation that the Kerr County flooding is a prophetic sign that points to the home of Simon and Brickell in Wimberley, Texas, because again, it connects to the Wimberley flooding. And they moved to Wimberley, Texas, and the mansion they're in there after they sold the mansion, and that's why they sold the mansion in Connecticut. Okay, the New Canaan, Connecticut mansion. Did I explain this well enough? This is amazing. I think I just explained it. Maybe that's a video in itself. Maybe I should cut the segment out and put it into its own video. The childhood home aspect of the story is a parallel with the tragic loss of children at Mystic Camp. Oh, that's pretty important, yes. Okay, and again, it was 4 days, as in bridge and door. It was 4 days after the Bridge Over Troubled Water sign, which was the Texas flooding. Right, as I've explained, which pointed to Paul Simon, as I've explained a few times now, over and over. So the story is about the childhood home. That's the key aspect of the story. She's completely upset and irrational because she's, for whatever reason, attached to her, because she's, okay, that's profound actually, and that's spiritual. She's attached to her childhood home. Why? Because she does not believe in God in the afterlife. She's not a born-again Christian. Born-again Christians, true Christians, are not in this world. They're living for the kingdom. They have died the self. They've come to the realization that their lives do not belong to them. And they are living for Christ, literally, not metaphorically somehow, like the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians. But they have died to self. That's what being born again implies, and Jesus said you need to be born again. It implies a death. And so they're not attached to childhood homes because it's futile. Everything in this world is temporary. There is zero, absolutely zero, as in 0.000% meaning to anything unless there is eternity. If you don't get that, which the vast majority of people, 99.9% of people don't get, including quote-unquote Christians, if you don't get that, you don't understand the Bible. You don't understand Christ. You don't understand Christianity. There is only meaning to anything. This is the revelation, right? This is the revelation that one gets when they become born again. There's zero meaning to anything unless there is an eternity. All right? So, for example, the person that says, like I met someone like the other day who said this, I've accomplished what I wanted to in life, I'm satisfied. That's the most ridiculous statement one could ever make. If they are an atheist, which he is. So, because they're going to die and then they're not going to remember anything that they did. Those accomplishments mean nothing. No one will ever remember that person after a certain period of time either, as if that would create meaning anyway. But you can't take your possessions or the things you've accomplished to you into the ground if there's no God and no eternity. The only way anything has any meaning is if there's an eternity. Otherwise, it's all completely 100% meaningless, including this woman's childhood home, for which she's ripping apart this celebrity publicly. It's infantile what she did, but she is an infant. spiritually, like most people are today. Okay. So, but the point is also that it's the childhood home. That's the reason why she got upset. It's all about the fact that Richard Gere promised he would take care of her childhood home. But this is in conjunction with the children that died tragically in the Mystic camp. That's amazing, right? Moreover, Lulu, that's her name, Simon, is grieving the loss of her childhood home in the same way that people are presently grieving the loss of children at Mystic Camp. That's another parallel. She's grieving the loss of her childhood home, and this is the same theme as the grieving over the loss of children at the Mystic Camp 4 days earlier. Lulu is made of 4 letters. Kerr County is 4 letters. Well, her name is equal to 3 times 22 in Simple English Gematria, which hints at Genesis 3:22. And that's because this is symbolic of the 5th trumpet judgment. Well, you know, I hesitate to go off into a tangent here, but God is using the Genesis 3:22 passage to symbolize what's coming, this promise from the demons that will come from the bottomless pit of immortality without God. And this promise will include the mark of the Antichrist. There will be another round of the mark of the Antichrist, but that doesn't mean that the thing that people took a couple of years ago wasn't the mark of the Antichrist. Actually, 4 years ago. And anyway, what will be promised is this transhumanism technology that will give them immortality without God, and that's Genesis 3:22, and that's also why this is involved. Her name is 3 times 22, because this is all connecting, as I'm explaining, with the door and the 5th trumpet to the bottomless pit in which the demons demonically possess for 5 months, right? That's why she talked about Richard Gere being demonically possessed. Okay, and that's it. That's clear. That's the clear connection. How do people become demonically possessed? Through taking the mark of the Antichrist, which will be promised from these same demons to give them immortality without God, which is Genesis 3:22. A reminder that the Paul Simon Mansion sign points to Graceland Mansion, okay, and the Little Egypt eclipse, because the eclipse passed over Little Egypt near the Graceland Mansion, and the White House Mansion, as I just mentioned a minute ago. Also, the story is how Simon's mansion is on a 32-acre plot and is being divided into 9 plots for 9 homes. Okay, so I was right about the 9, not 8. 9 being the number of judgment. And Gere points to Chicago, as I mentioned. But the budget of the movie for Chicago was $45 million. 45 is the 9th triangular number. And 4 plus 5 equals 9. 45 is a multiple of 9. But also, bridge is equal to 45 in Simple English Gematria. Okay, and let's see. Paul Simon will die exactly 4,500.00% of a year after. You know, I forget. But it's in another video anyway. So, Obama was inaugurated in 2009. 32 is equal to 8 times 4. Obama is equal to 84 in Hebrew Gematria. Obama is equal to 32 in Simple English Gematria. Okay? And Obama was born in the date 8-4. His name is equal to 84 in Hebrew Gematria. Obama, as in King Antichrist, as in the King of Rock and Roll, Graceland Mansion, which is incidentally why, because the mansion is also symbolic of the king's palace. That's why it's located in Little Egypt, because the king of Egypt is a type for the Antichrist in the Bible, who chased the Jews out of Egypt, okay, when they crossed over the troubled water. Okay, and the Antichrist king will be in the White House Mansion, which, as I mentioned, located at the 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue and all that, with 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms. Anyway, that's the 44th president we're talking about. Simon, who is bridge symbolism, because of bridge over troubled water, which equals door, same symbolism, and the door equals 4, as I've explained, 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is predicted to die on August 1st, exactly 4 times 4 months, after he sang Graceland in the White House mansion, and Graceland is about the Graceland mansion, on the date 4/1. Okay? He's going to die on 8/1. That was 4 times 4 months exactly after the date 4/1, as in the first day of the 4th month, which was the day that the IDF accidentally killed the 4th prime number of people working for the World Central Kitchen, if you recall. And that day was also 4,444% of a calendar year after the first day of the 444-day Iran hostage crisis. Simon sang for the state dinner for the Prime Minister of Japan when he sang at the White House, when he sang Graceland at the White House. Japan in God's signs is symbolic of a few things. One of them is anime, Japanese anime, which is obsessed with demonic possession, which is the symbolism for Paul Simon as well, because of the door and the bridge. The demons will cross over and then demonically possess people, as I just mentioned and explained. And this is also why the Japanese culture is ubiquitous with the nonsensical little cartoon characters, which are in fact prophetically, symbolically, symbolism for demons. Okay, and Japan is also symbolism for nuclear bombs, and following the death of Paul Simon is predicted to be the dirty bomb explosions, which are conventional bombs with nuclear material in New York City and the port of Los Angeles, which I'll explain in other videos. That's why Paul Simon incidentally will die before them, because Paul Simon's death will be the warning, because it'll point to the first verse of Revelation chapter 8, the sound of silence, warning in heaven before the trumpet judgments. The 7 trumpet judgments, Paul Simon's album, most recent one, is 7 Psalms, and Late in the Evening, which is in itself a name that symbolizes the impending judgment, is known for its heavy use of trumpets. Okay, so, but anyway, that's why Simon's death connects to the performance he gave to the Prime Minister of Japan, because Simon is ultimately pointing to the 5th trumpet judgment and the demonic possession. And that's what Japan symbolizes in God's signs. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.